What makes human communication special? That's what I'm going to be talking about in this little lecture. So if we think about different animals, from deer to birds to different kind of primates and even bacteria, all of these individuals communicate. But it's clear that humans are doing something different, something more advanced, more complex. And it's often easy to think that language is our defining feature, something that's unique to humans. In fact, I think a lot of people think about language as a sort of pinnacle of evolution. And you have different animals down here at the bottom which can communicate to some extent, but you get more and more complex communication until you get to humans at the top. We're the best at communicating. We have this special ability that sets us apart from all the other animals. And what I'm going to discuss with you today by basically showing you a load of videos about what animals can do is that as research progresses, that line between us humans and them animals is slowly blurring. Animals can actually do a lot of the stuff that we do. And humans might be unique in having a combination of special abilities that lets us do language, rather than one unique thing. So, what's special about human language? Let's look at what some experts think. Noam Chomsky, who's one of the most famous linguists, thinks that the thing that humans have that's special is infinite recursive syntax. That is, we can mentally embed things inside other things. So I can say the tree, and I can say the tree was tall. I can sort of combine those two things. Then I can say Buster thought the tree was tall, or Chatter said Buster thought the tree was tall, and I can keep going, keep adding things, keep embedding things within other things. Chomsky thinks this is a unique human ability. But it's not the only possible answer to our question. So, for example, Jim Herford, who's an evolutionary linguist, thinks that the special thing that we have is semantically compositional syntax, which is slightly different, which is the ability to combine meanings to create new meanings. Dan Everett thinks the special thing we have is symbolic meaning. That's a bit simpler of a task. But the ability to use words to refer to things is maybe what makes language special. Then researchers like Penelope Brown and Stephen Levinson think that pragmatics is the key. So we can use language not just to refer to stuff, but to facilitate social action, to build friendships, to ask for things, to interact with other people. So there's this continuum in linguistics between an old view and a new view on what makes language special. So the old view, which is led by Chomsky, sees language as a single unique mutation that leads to a special ability to do syntax. And Chomsky says it's hard to imagine a course of selection that could have resulted in language. So we have this sort of one ability by accident, and that leads to all of our abilities to communicate in the way we do. That contrasts with a sort of new view where actually we're looking at many different gradual adaptations that support language. Language is a complex thing that's supported by many adaptations. And some of those adaptations we have in common with animals. It's just that humans are special in that we have a combination of lots of these different adaptations that add up to make us able to do these special things. The eagle-eyed among you will spot Chomsky on the left and on the right. So his views have changed over time. And no one really sticks to either one of these extremes. There's a continuum in the field. But let's take a look at what animals can do and ask what makes human communication special. So what do you think? What is the standout ability that we have that you think no other animal can do? Here's some ideas that we're going to have a look at. And this is basically just an excuse for me to show you some fun animal videos. All right, let's take the first example. Maybe you think our ability to articulate, to speak, to produce sounds is unique. Speaking, of course, is part of what language is all about. And it's true that humans have adaptations in the vocal tract that are different from many primates. And for example, those may allow us to make a greater range of sounds. But actually, lots of animals can make different sounds. Lots of animals have some flexible vocalization. Actually, some of our closest ancestors are not the best examples, but there are some unusual examples. For example, this is a beluga whale that was in captivity in a zoo. And a diver was cleaning the tank, and while under the water they thought they heard a human shouting for help. So they surfaced, looked around, but there was nothing. Dived back in, and again they heard this human voice. And in fact, it was the beluga whale who had been listening to humans speak and had adapted the way that they vocalize to sound a bit more human. Let's hear what they actually sound like. Okay, so this isn't exactly like human speech, but actually compared to typical beluga whale vocalizations, this is very different, much more with the rhythm and the pitch range that humans have. And of course, many animals have flexible communication abilities. So parrots, of course, can talk. They don't even have lips. And then I found this interesting video of this elephant who was able to produce some Korean words by blowing air into its mouth with its trunk. So apparently it's saying the Korean word for good. Of course, there's no evidence that they understand these words. It's just that they have some flexibility in vocalization. People used to think that we had an ability, a unique ability to control our breathing. And that's very important in speech. But in fact, recent studies have shown that animals like gorillas can control their breathing as well. Here's an example of a gorilla controlling their breathing to play a whistle.
That's good.
That doesn't look like much, maybe. But in fact, it shows that they have some flexible control over their breathing. Of course, this is a gorilla in captivity. And it's an interesting question whether individuals in captivity show sort of latent abilities that they wouldn't typically show in the wild. And of course, we as humans live we've made our own kind of captivity, our own kind of safe space where we can express more of our abilities. And we'll come back to what primates can do in captivity again. All right, you say, well, maybe other animals can articulate, but surely the thing that sets us apart is our brains. We have really big brains, and that's what allows us to do language. Other animals don't have big brains, and therefore they can't do language. And it's true that humans do have lots of neurons. For example, roundworms only have a few hundred neurons, where humans have many, many, many. Actually, we don't have the biggest brains in the world. So horses and elephants have bigger brains. And in fact, if you look at the sort of brain to body ratio, you actually find that some things have a higher brain body ratio. So our brains are big, but they're not vastly, vastly bigger than many other animals. And in fact, we're not always the best at processing things rapidly. So for example, I'm going to play a game with you. In a moment, I'm going to flash up the numbers 1 to 9 somewhere on this screen. I want you to try and remember the position of all of these numbers. And we'll see how well you can do. All right, you ready? 3, 2, 1. All right, how did you do? Can you remember the position of each of these things? Probably what's happening is you can sort of remember where 1 and 2 is, but then your sort of brain gets a bit hazy. Maybe your brain wasn't fast enough to process that visual images. Let's have a look at how some chimpanzees do at the same task. Okay, so obviously here the chimpanzee is doing almost perfectly on this task. And you should be impressed by two things. First of all, that it can read the numbers. And this is a chimpanzee that's been trained to recognize the numbers. It doesn't understand mathematics. It can't read words or text. It just recognizes the numbers and it knows that these come in a certain order. It's been trained to press these buttons in a certain order. And then the second interesting thing is that it can very rapidly assess this image and remember the position of all these things. In fact, the latency here is less time than it would take for you to look at one number and then fixate on a different number. So other animals' brains can do amazing things. It's not that we're the best at everything. But what about the structure of our brains? We have certain things in our brains that allow us to link the sounds that we hear, the things that we see, to our motor pathways to produce those sounds, so we can do vocal learning. It turns out, though, that other animals, like birds, can do something very similar. And in fact, they have very similar pathways to us. In fact, the evolution of these pathways might go back a very, very long way. So that many mammals have the same kind of structures that we do in our brains. And in fact, many of these mammals can do vocal learning. So bats can do vocal learning. Whales and cetaceans can do vocal learning. And in fact, so what might not be the sort of general architecture of our brains might not be that different. But in humans, we just have a much bigger capacity for integrating that information in different ways. So again, humans have sort of more advanced abilities. But it's not a sort of clear black and white distinction between us and other animals. All right, how about the idea of symbolic communication? We can use words to refer to things symbolically. Well, let's have a look whether other animals can do this. One group of animals that can do this are vervet monkeys, and we're going to see what happens when they see some of the predators in their environments. So in this case, let's have a look at this video. So in this video, the individuals have seen a leopard and they give out this sort of little bark vocalization. When other individuals hear this bark, then they sort of look around and they run to safety. They run up a tree. Let's see what happens when they see an eagle. So they make a slightly different vocalization here. They'll typically look up, as this one is doing, and then try and run to cover. And then finally, let's see what happens when they see a snake. So when they see a snake, they'll make this other sound, and they'll sort of stand up and look around on the ground. So there are 3 different vocalizations with 3 different predators, and researchers have been doing a set of ingenious experiments to show that they respond to the sound of other of their fellow monkeys producing these alarms. And they behave differently depending on these things. So there's a debate in the literature about whether the monkeys understand these sounds as being representing particular types of danger, as being symbolic of these things. And many people think that it's not quite the same as human language, but it's clearly on the way there. Animals have an ability to refer to other things in their environment. Of course, there's another question about how flexible this is. First, let's look at the idea of abstract concepts. So referring to predators kind of makes sense. That's an evolutionary advantageous thing to be able to do. But what about more abstract things like blue or justice or theories of time like tomorrow? Well, some animals can do this kind of thing as well. This is Alex the parrot, who's a grey parrot, and was trained by Irene Pepperberg. And we'll see that they have an ability to sort of recognize categories of things and generalize these concepts to new stimuli.
Alex, what matter?
Whoa!
That's right.
So there, Irene Pepperberg asked what matter, which is their sort of code language for what is this made from. Alex responded, wool, which was correct.
How many?
2.
That's right. You're a good boy. No,
Can I go
sweetie.
back?
No, you can't go back yet. You gotta.
You want some water?
All right. Do you want some water, or are you just asking to interrupt? Are you just asking to interrupt? I know you.
Go back?
I know you. Hey. Look. What color bigger? What color bigger?
Green.
Green. Oh, you're a good
back.
boy. Okay, Alex, look. Look what I got for you. Hey, look. Look at all these neat toys. Look. Hey, look, can you tell me, on the tray, how many green block? Green block.
2.
Good parrot. 2 green block. 2. Good parrot. Yeah.
So Alex the parrot can do an impressive range of things, including asking to end the experiment, asking for water and interacting in a kind of very natural way. But here what we're interested in is the ability to count objects, to recognize categories of objects. So Irene Pepperberg was asking how many green blocks. There were different blocks, there were different green things. Alex could combine that information to think about green blocks as a sort of combined concept. There are limits to what it can do, but this is still pretty impressive. Primates can do some of this as well. This is chimpanzee Sarah, who is trained to use little plastic tokens to communicate. So the chimpanzees don't have as much vocal flexibility as we do, but they have great manual flexibility, and some have been taught to use sign languages. And in this case, what was interesting is the ability for quite some abstract concepts like same and different. So let's play a game that was played with Sarah. This is an analogical reasoning task, and the question is: there are two blocks on the left, 2 blocks on the right, these two blocks, they are the same. The color is the same. So the relationship between them is same. These two blocks are different, and the relationship between them is different. And so the relationship between the relationships is different. These two things are the same. These two things are different. That's a different. So this is a sort of second order analogical task. The first order is just comparing two things, and the second order is comparing two groups of things. Now the interesting thing was that Sarah the chimpanzee couldn't do this task. It was just too hard until they were given the chips to represent same and different. And then what they could do is say, okay, these two things, they're the same. Put a little chip that represents the same. These two things are different. Put a little chip that says the same, that they're different. And now they could just compare these two chips and get the right answer, that the second order similarity is different. So what the researchers concluded is that maybe what language does for us is give us tools for thinking. They're sort of shorthand labels for ideas. And we find it hard to think about this sort of big question. The language lets us break these problems down into simpler questions. And chimps can do this if they're given enough training. It's just they don't do this necessarily in the wild. But recently there has been some evidence that primates can refer to things that are not here and now, what's called displaced reference. And I'm just going to play this video from Lemurian Call. Oops.
What do you do if a kid is in danger? Sometimes shouting at them is enough. But what if the kid is really in danger? As in, just within pouncing distance of a very hungry tiger danger. You might keep the kid quiet, wait for the coast to clear, and then when it's safe, explain the danger. That might seem like the obvious answer, but in nature, very few animals are capable of holding it all in. This ability to wait and communicate information after an event has passed or about an event that will happen in the future is called displaced reference. Humans do it, honeybees do it, and now it turns out that orangutans do it too. Researchers conducted an experiment with 7 female orangutans in the Katambe jungle of northeast Sumatra. They pretended to be predators by draping themselves with giant sheets and crawling along the forest floor. One sheet was covered in a tiger stripe pattern, one had a pattern of abstract colors, one was white with multicolored spots, and the last was a plain white sheet. Once the predator was spotted by an orangutan, the researcher would stop for 2 minutes before moving out of sight. Surprisingly, the orangutans would wait several minutes before letting out a warning call. They did this in 12 of the 24 trials, with an average delay of 7 minutes. So why the wait? Sumatran orangutans have the longest child-rearing period of any primate. Infant orangutans stay with their mothers for up to 9 years, which allows them to develop critical forest survival skills. Letting out a warning call at the first sight of a predator is just too dangerous, because it might alert the predator to their presence. But at the same time, the parent needs to teach the infant to recognize these situations in the future. So the mothers wait. Long enough that the danger has passed, but short enough that the infant can still learn from the encounter. Researchers say this clearly demonstrates the ability to use displaced reference in a non-human primate, something never seen before in the wild. And that suggests another way that orangutans, one of our closest living relatives and a prolific communicator, may be a model for how language evolved in people. Who knows, if we gave orangutans 1,000,000 years, they just might have something to say.
So I think that's an interesting idea, that some animals can do very advanced stuff, and that makes sense in their environments. And us as humans, we might have many of those abilities that we can join together. What about the big question, Chomsky's sort of unique property that humans have, the ability to do syntax? So that's the ability to say something like, the house is behind the mountain, or the mountain is behind the house, and those two things mean very different things because of the syntactic relations between those words. Can animals do this? Well, many researchers attempted to teach syntactic communication to several primates. So there's Nim Chimpsky, who's named after Noam Chomsky, Washoe, Kanzi, Chantek. They were all taught to use various communication systems, from sign languages to using sets of symbols that you could point at. And they learned to do this. So Kanzi actually learned over 300 symbols. Chantek paints and makes tools, but there are limits. So, and these animals are trained, they can deal with these concepts in the lab, but they're just not motivated to do this in the wild. And even in the lab, there's very little evidence for the ability to process syntax. So the language was usually used to request things, or basically demand things, name things. But there were very few cases where primates put these words together in a meaningful order. That seems like a limit, something that other primates can't do. That's unique to us. However, other animals who can't necessarily do the sort of symbolic stuff do appear to be able to do some aspects of syntax. So, for example, songbirds can learn complex combinations of songs, of tweets and chirps. So these are Bengalese finches who actually have a very complex song. And in fact, the males in this case sing. The more complex their song is, the more attractive they are to females. So it's used as a sort of sexual selection signal. So these animals can do complex syntax, but there's no compositional semantics here. These signals don't mean anything beyond just look at me, basically. So that's kind of interesting that chimpanzees and other apes appear to be able to do some aspects of meaning, but not syntax. And some animals can do some aspects of syntax, but not meaning. And that's maybe the unique thing about humans is we're able to do both things. Then we come to the problem of honeybees, which cause a big problem. They're social insects, and they, when they find a source of pollen, they go back to the hive and they communicate the location of this source of pollen to their fellow bee friends using what's called a waggle dance. And I'm just going to demonstrate this in this video.
The bee only waggles on a part of its route, the straight run, indicated here by the waved line. The secret lies in the direction of the straight run, or to be more precise, in the angle between the straight run and the perpendicular, which in this case is 90 degrees to the left. This tells the other bees that food is available 90 degrees to the left of the sun. If the angle is 60 degrees to the right, they'll be flying 60 degrees to the right of the sun.
So this is a kind of impressive thing to be able to do, to communicate the direction of a source of pollen. They also communicate the distance that you would have to fly to get there. And they do all kinds of complicated things to integrate moving around objects and things. So these are two aspects of meaning that are communicated together. And this is very close to syntactic ability. However, before we get too excited, Jim Herford suggests that although this is impressive, it's a bit different from what humans can do. So it's simple, it's a limited domain. This is an innate ability that insects have rather than our learned ability. It's very contextual, so it relies on sort of regular things in the world. Herford says that he thinks that no non-human animal has any semantically compositional syntax, where the form of the syntactic combination determines how the meanings of the parts combine to make the meaning of the whole. So with the bees, they can do this to some extent, but they can't suddenly start communicating about the presence of something else. They can't make up new meanings, and they don't learn these things. However, there is still, the more we learn about different animals, the more we're able to sort of interact with them, run experiments, observe them in their native habitats, the more surprising they become. So here's a group of dolphins that can do some aspects of syntax. So that's really interesting, I think. In other bits of the experiment, they show that the dolphins can tell the difference between take the hoop to the basket and take the basket to the hoop. So that's some understanding of a syntactic ability. And then at the end there, that ability to come up with a sort of creative way of communicating something is really impressive. And this touches on the idea of flexibility. So some people think the sort of unique thing about human language is our ability to create new meanings and to use meanings in different contexts to mean different things. So for example, there's a mountain of work for us at home. That word mountain is being used metaphorically. Is there anything like this in the animal world? Well, actually, the more we look at animal communication, the more flexible it seems. So gorillas, for example, do a lot of gestures and manual movements to communicate with each other. So for example, a one-handed grab is often a contact play invitation. But actually, a one-handed grab in different contexts can mean different things. As a request to calm down, a request to chase, or to stop doing something. And so gorillas use these gestures in contextually rich ways to mean different things, just like we use words in different contexts to mean different things. Genti et al. Figure this out by observing lots of gorilla behavior. And they suggest that these signs are not inflexible signals, but employed for intentional communication to specific individuals. Here's one of my favorite examples of the ability of animals to come up with pragmatic understandings of what's going on. So this is a test of mutual exclusivity. This is Chase the dog, who's learned the names of 1,000 toys. So you can ask for one of these toys by name. Chaser will go and get one of these things, which is a much bigger vocabulary than we thought that animals could learn. And in fact, the only reason they stopped at 1,000 is because they ran out of time. Chaser seemed like they were not giving up. But here's a test where they're going to ask for a name of something that Chaser does not know, and we'll see what happens.
Chaser, find airborne. Find airborne, Chase. Find airborne.
So these other toys, there's one toy that they've never seen before, and there's lots of other toys that they do know.
Get airborne, Papa, Chaser.
So you can see there's some sort of confusion here. Chaser is saying, "What? What are you asking
do it,
for?"
Girl, do it. Do it, girl. Do it. Do it, girl. Bring it to Papa. Bring it to Papa. Bring it to Papa. Airborne.
And then what Chaser
There's
does,
airborne. Good girl. Good girl.
what Chaser does is bring the toy that she hasn't seen before. So Chaser hears a word that they've never heard and thinks, well, maybe it refers to this thing that I haven't heard. That's something that human children can do by about the age of 4. And it shows some sort of advanced pragmatic reasoning in the context of communication. So again, animals being more flexible, closer to our abilities than we perhaps expected. One of the final things I'm going to talk about is cooperation. So we use communication to work together. Is that a unique thing? Well, Michael Tomasello thinks that it is. He thinks that we have lots of adaptations for social interactions, especially compared to other primates. So if you look, for example, at our eyes, you can tell there, this is a picture of Michael Tomasello, you can tell that he's looking at us. Because the whites of his eyes sort of give a clear indication of the direction that you're looking. That indication is not so clear in many primates. You can't really tell, it's not as easy to tell where they're looking. And this, Tomasello thinks that this is an important part of beginning to communicate. If we can sort of talk about something and see where someone is looking, we can have joint attention with that thing, focus on it, and work together to communicate about it. And in fact, we might have many adaptations which make us just more willing to communicate, or even just we just really like cooperating and communicating. Here's an example of an experiment run with a human child and a chimpanzee. The experiment is to play a little game where you sort of bounce a thing, and then the experimenter is instructed to just stop playing and see what happens. Let's see what happens with a human child. So here they are, they play this sort of fun bouncing game, and then the experimenter will stop. The child wants to keep playing and is disappointed. And in fact, in this case, will come round and very inventively communicate with the experimenter what they want to do. They want to continue this sort of cooperative game. Let's do exactly the same thing, this time with a chimpanzee. Here you see the chimpanzee just has no interest in doing this cooperative game. They have the sort of manual dexterity that the human has, but Tomasello argues that the thing that differentiates us is a desire to cooperate. And this might be the basis of our communication abilities. Okay, so let's sum up. What kinds of communication abilities evolved in animals? Herford suggests that they can do a range of things. They can do deliberate, voluntary social actions on others. They can monitor and manipulate other animals' attentions. And they can do, to some extent, arbitrary symbolic signals. They can use those for different categories. In the wild, it's various categories of objects, usually limited and partly innate, partly motivated by evolutionary pressures. In captivity, they can actually learn to do a range of objects and actions. This can extend to being voluntary, but is often for selfish needs. That thing that Tomasello showed, they don't really want to collaborate. And why should they? In contrast, humans have many things that might set them apart. First of all is our massive lexicon. We can just learn an enormous range of things. Second thing is semantically compositional syntax. We can take two ideas and combine them to create an idea that's bigger than its parts. We can use meanings flexibly. We're very social. And another really unique thing about humans is the massive diversity of language. So there are over 7,000 languages in the world. This is an image of Papua New Guinea. It's a country about the size of Spain, and it has over 800 languages spoken in this place. That's a lot more diversity than any single species of any other animal. And that's a really interesting aspect of human communication as well. So what I've tried to say is that the old view of language evolution saw language as a sort of single ability, the ability to do syntax. This evolved suddenly and only in humans. And as we do more research, we're starting to see that language is underlain by many different abilities, and these are supported by different adaptations. Some of them not specific to language, just general adaptations. As we research the abilities of other animals more and more, we see that we share some of these abilities with other animals. So it's a really exciting time to be a linguist. You never know what animals, what we're going to see next. One of the most recent things I saw is that now bees can do social learning, which is something that even some primates struggle with. So it's a very exciting time to think about what kinds of communications might be possible